everyone, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Mia, and we are so glad that you are here. This show is where we share our daily highs and lows and talk about how we're navigating them and leaning into God every step of the way.
Yeah, and today's episode is all about halting the drift. It's actually a concept we picked up at a Weekend to Remember. It's actually our second year in a row attending, and let me tell you, it's been a game changer for our marriage.
Yeah, so basically, Weekend to Remember is a 3-day seminar for married couples. We actually took my mom this year, and she was dating her boyfriend.
Engaged.
Or yes, they were engaged. So you don't have to be married if you're in
Yeah.
a serious relationship. You could still go. But essentially, the first day they talk about the dream, which is oneness. Then they talk about the fall and how we ultimately drift towards isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And then they talk about the hope, which is where we bring God into it. And then the last day is all about the mission. So
Right.
how our marriage isn't just about inviting God into our story and redeeming us, but how we're supposed to then go out and impact our corner of the world. So that's just kind of the elevator version of what the Weekend to Remember is. But on today's episode, we are going to be talking specifically about the fall and how to halt the drift, which is, the term that they came up with. But to begin with, we'll talk about why no marriage is static and how you're either moving toward isolation or towards oneness. Right. And second to that, we'll talk about how important it is to check in with one another regularly because things can change so fast. And then lastly, we'll wrap it up by just talking a little bit about how it is never too late to start moving back towards oneness, and we'll share a little piece of our testimony from going to a 2 last year when we went to the Weekend to Remember for the first time, and then how we went back this year at an 8.
Yeah, and we're going to go over those numbers in a second and make it all make sense. And of course, we're going to anchor this entire thing in Scripture and share some laughs along the way. So let's just dive in.
Yeah, so the first big takeaway from the Weekend to Remember is that no marriage is ever standing still. You're either moving toward oneness or you are drifting towards isolation. All right, so I just pulled it up in our booklet that we got this year. So essentially on one page, isolation is 1 through 5, and we'll read through each level so that you guys can understand what we're talking about when we say these numbers. And then on the other page, we have 6 through 10, which would be oneness. So for reference, we'll go ahead and read what each level is, but while we do that, consider where you're at in your relationship. Be asking yourself, do I resonate with this level? Is this where I'm at in my marriage today or this hour or in this season? And then also be mindful of where your spouse is, or even go ahead and play this episode for them and ask them, where they're at.
Yeah, so starting off at number 1, I have already pursued another relationship. Maybe it's I hate this person, or I'm married and I'm looking for a way out. Like maybe you found a lawyer and you're pursuing divorce.
Yeah, so 2 would be the thought of staying in this marriage is depressing. I've resolved to stay in a bad marriage for the sake of the kids or for a religious belief. So maybe you're not yet at the point where you're ready for divorce and you're done, or maybe you've resolved to stay in a toxic or just emotionally abusive relationship, or maybe even an abusive relationship just for either children or your religious beliefs.
Yeah, and I just want to stop right there. Like, if you're in an abusive relationship, that's not where God wants you. And we're not advocating for anybody to stay in a toxic, abusive marriage.
Yeah, I think we could do an entire podcast on that, but I like that you mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Going right along, 3, my spouse has done something that has completely broken my trust. I'm falling out of love, or I don't feel loved by my spouse.
Yeah, so 4 would be my marriage is not improving and I am fearful that it may get worse. We've changed so much since we got married. I don't feel like I recognize my spouse. I feel like a lot of people find themselves in this zone before they get to the point where they're ready to leave. Like you feel like this is kind of like the essence of drifting apart.
Yeah.
And this is where I feel like you could really catch yourselves and be like, hey, we need to get a handle on things. Like, this is kind of that, like...
Yeah, this is where you start seeing, those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in your relationship. Like, you like contempt and, all the... And we can definitely go in deeper in a different podcast.
Yeah.
But moving right along, number 5 is, we generally like being around each other, but increasingly feel like roommates. We have occasional moments of connection, with your spouse. Like, it's not all bad, but it's not all good either. It's kind of like that middle point.
Yeah. And then moving up, so all these are progressively getting a little bit better. Number 6, now we're drifting towards oneness, is I feel like our marriage could be more than we're at right now, but we love each other and we're working through our differences. So kind of still leaning towards isolation, but at a bare minimum, you guys are still together. You still have your fundamentals, you still have your foundation, and both of you are committed to making the marriage better.
Absolutely. And then moving along, we got number 7, which is, our marriage is healthy. We understand each other's needs. We spend time working on various aspects of our relationship.
Yeah.
So, I mean, read
Solid
the book,
place.
it's not a bad place to be. Again,
Yeah.
you're not meant to stay at any one spot.
Other than 10.
Well, ideally, you be in the 10. Realistically, though, this is a scale, and you're going to slide up and down.
Yeah.
Preferably on the upper end. Then hopefully we don't dip into the lower end. But again, we understand if you are on the lower end.
Yeah, so 8 says, our love feels young and free. I'm very satisfied in our marriage. We laugh and play on this journey through life together, and we resolve conflicts very quickly. So again, it's just getting better and better as the numbers get higher.
Yeah. Number 9, our marriage is resilient to any storm life throws at us. We are confident we'll have a lifetime of love, and we're committed to achieving marital bliss. And you hear about that, when and we'll go over this.
Meet these people.
Right, absolutely. You hear about these people high love banks who they can weather any storm. And one of the things that we always picked up was about momentum.
Yeah.
If you're having good days, which are the good months and good years, these little troubles, these little bumps along the way, you'll just shoot right over them.
Yeah.
Because you have all this momentum. But if you're, every day is a fight and every day it's breaking down and every little thing, you have no momentum. So then it's gonna feel like every bump is like this mountain.
Yeah.
So that's where you get to saying
one step forward,
4 steps back, 5 steps back. Whatever the saying is.
17.
Yeah.
All right. Lastly is level 10, which is our marriage is an inspiration to others and we are helping other couples. We are thriving personally on our marital oneness, and God has, really stepped into our relationship and uniquely designed us and destined our relationship.
Yeah, right. So our first time out here, it hit us really hard, especially when they asked us to rate our marriage on a scale of the 1 to 10.
Yeah.
And to find out, last year we were honestly at a 2. I mean, I feel like we were alternating between maybe a 1, some days a 3, but mostly we're kind of rating that spot of a 2.
Yeah. That was definitely a tough moment, but also kind of the wake-up call that we needed. One verse that really ties into this is Amos 3:3, which says, "Do 2 walk together unless they have agreed to do so?" So essentially that's just highlighting that oneness takes intentionality.
Yeah, absolutely. And the drift towards isolation, it doesn't happen overnight. It's skipping a date night or avoiding hard conversations, maybe just being on autopilot and just being comfortable in that season. It could be coming home late for work habitually and just bad habits in general.
Yeah, it's all of those little things. And one thing that we've really learned is the little choices that you make every day matter so much. Are we choosing to connect to one another, or are we letting distractions pull each other apart? And I feel like even this morning I was saying it's the people that you're most comfortable with that you treat the worst often is the trend. And our pastor spoke about that. That's why I was saying it's when you're at the Wawa and you're holding the door for people and you're going out of your way to be so kind to a stranger, and then you go home and you're treating your spouse like trash. It's when you're comfortable with someone, you start letting, those boundaries slip and, those morals slip and you start, just living on autopilot because you're comfortable.
Yeah. And I mean, really the dangers of autopilot, I cannot speak enough to this. I was actually listening to this podcast last year. It was called Gritty Men Podcast. It's by this pastor out of Texas. He was just warning about the dangers of autopilot. And basically when you're on autopilot, you're just falling into this, whatever my flesh desires.
Yeah.
It's, whatever feels comfortable, whatever feels right.
Yeah.
And there's no room for God in that. It's literally me first, my flesh, what I want. Yeah. And then that is such a dangerous place to be. And I feel like as men, we're so susceptible to this. Yeah. Where we're just I'm doing the grind. I'm getting up, I'm going to work, I'm coming home, maybe the wife's nagging me, and I just want to come home. Maybe some guys I want to come home, crack a beer, and just watch TV. Some people are, I want to come home and just, put my headphones on, play video games, and just tune out the world. Yeah. And all it is just, it's appeasing your flesh, and it's just being on autopilot. And basically, as men, we're called to put our wives' needs above ours, you know.
And vice versa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But as men, we lead. We go first.
Yeah.
And the importance of being a man and being a leader can't be taken away.
Yeah. So, moving on to the second point, since this podcast will probably be a little bit longer than our average, the second big point is that isolation and oneness is a scale. It's not a set it and forget it type thing. This is something that can change daily, hourly, even by the minute, by the second.
Yeah, literally in the middle of a conversation, you could go from, you know, maybe on the upper end of the scale to the lower end of the scale, depending on how your spouse is acting.
Yeah, and that's why checking in with one another is so important. Like, we will literally ask each other, like, hey, where are you at on the scale today? And it's not about blaming, it's not about shaming, it's about being honest with one another so that you can have those course corrections that are needed.
Right, and even that looks like, you know, maybe even taking a prayerful pause.
Yeah.
And it's not just, hey, we got to hammer this out right now. It might be like, hey, cool, I need 5 because you're doing too much.
Yeah.
But, like, you know, this reminds me of, in the book of Ephesians, let me pull it up real quick. Here it is. Ephesians 4:26. You know, we do not let the sun go down while we're still angry. And that verse isn't just about anger. It's also about addressing issues before they fester.
Yeah, that's kind of like what it doesn't mean literally stay up into the middle of the night, because especially for you, like, you get up at 5 a.m.
Right.
Like, that is the absolute worst when I'm trying to, like, hit a conversation, have, like, the deepest conversation at midnight, and you have to get up in 5 hours. Like, that's not going anywhere. What it means is to not let something go on for days, weeks, months, and just not address problematic behaviors. But we'll be honest, some check-ins are really uncomfortable, but they've also been opportunities to really just pray together, to apologize, and for us to grow closer together in our marriage.
And just moving right along, you know, the most beautiful thing about this all is you can choose to start moving towards oneness no matter where you're at on the scale.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, last year we were at like a 1 or a 2. We were so disconnected, barely communicating, and honestly, it felt easier to drift. Like, it would have been easier to just get the divorce, be done with it, move on, try again, start over. Like, that's what felt easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, just being stuck on that autopilot for men, like, it was just easier for me to just kind of put my head down, get into work, and just kind of ignore it all and put it all back. Like, we were at a point where I was sleeping in a separate bedroom. We were barely talking. I was walking past Mia's door in the morning on my way out to work. And
yeah,
like,
and we'll definitely do, like, a whole nother podcast since this one is running long.
Absolutely. Sharing
more of our testimony. That's really the whole point of the Peaks and Valley podcast, is just share, you know, the peaks as well as the valleys and everything that we've gone through. But one quote that I heard at a women's conference that really stuck with me is, you'll never drift towards holiness. It takes intentionality. And we chose to pray together more, to go back to counseling, to start reading marriage books. And that's how, you know, we ended up where we are today.
Yeah, and I mean, just kind of like I already said, like, I heard something similar about how we need to stop running on, as men, we need to stop running on autopilot and start being super intentional. And like, today, by God's grace, I'd say we're about at an 8. It's not perfect, but it's definitely progress, and, you know, we're committed to keep that momentum.
Yeah, so some takeaways here are, number 1, your marriage is always moving towards either oneness or isolation. No marriage is static. So you need to be checking in regularly, because things can shift so quickly, and no matter where you are, you can always choose to move back towards oneness.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope this encourages you to take some intentional steps in your own marriage, relationship, you know, whatever season you find yourself in.
Yeah, and don't forget to like this video and to leave us a comment, share your stories, or ask us any questions. You can also send me a private message on my Instagram. My handle is @MiaAshmen.
Yeah, so thanks for listening to Deserts and Gardens. Until next time, walk in love,
live with purpose, and trust God in every desert and garden. See ya!